Well, it's another wonderful Wednesday, and you guys know that I always look forward to coming home, getting all ready. It's mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. To bring this show to you live and direct from Bermuda and Texas. Yeah. Hi, Jess.
Hello. I always get so jazzed hearing the theme song.
I know
It's like
it's
such a great
exciting.
way to start the show.
It is. It is. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be in the world. If you're watching us live, all 41 of you, thank you so much for tuning into our live broadcast. Welcome to the Wade in the Water live show. I'm your co-host, Weldon Wade, and I'm joined here tonight, as it's been since like season one, episode one, sort of, the wonderful Jessica Lee.
Hello,
We're here.
everyone. We're here.
We're here, and what's really dope, you guys, is yeah, tonight, just it's nice to kind of say, like, tonight is February 16th, 2022. We just had Valentine's Day just the other day. So yeah, Valentines, whatever, like, however you felt, that I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, my birthday is on Friday. Oh my gosh. Jess, I mean, how was
Birthday.
your Valentine's Day? Mine's was like, all right.
It was good. It was all right. I'm super excited about that we're kind of playing off with the whole Valentine's Day thing with oysters because a lot of
First
times,
love, yeah.
people talk about like having oysters, Valentine's Day, romantic, all that. But we'll be talking about the romantic side of oysters. We'll be talking about the practical side of oysters too.
Yeah, and Jess, thank you so much for getting our guest on tonight's show. I do see Claudia backstage. Hi, Claudia. Before we bring you live to our audience, I just want to thank you guys. Again, I've said this already. Whether you're tuned in live, watching us on the replay, or listening to us via podcast, thank you so much for your viewership. It really means a lot to us. And if you want to support the show, engagement helps. So give us a like, give us a heart. Comments help too. We want to make this interactive. But what's really dope about tonight's topic is, like, we're talking about food, right? Like, and I don't know much about oysters. I have something up on my other screen. I got oysters, mussels, clams, and scallops because, like, that's kind of what I think about. It's they're sort of in the same family, I would probably say, but we got scientists on this show, and I'm keen to kind of flesh it all out. Yeah, we're talking really about oysters, and it's all in our title. Let me just bring up that banner. Season 2, episode 6 tonight. Pearls of the Gulf. Jess, would you like to introduce our guest? I'd love that.
Absolutely. So we have Claudia Schinnie coming on the show tonight, and she is a microbiologist,
Oh my
which is pretty
gosh.
cool because Dr. Ocean, who we just had on last week, is
Yep,
also a microbiologist. We're kind of on a theme here of
we're
like
doing it.
itty bitty. We're gonna have to bring on like a someone who studies pelagics next. I don't know.
I don't know.
But right before that, we had whales, so we
We
just went from like opposite ends of the scale.
we're building
But
it while we fly, and we can have anyone on deck. As far as I'm
exactly.
concerned, it's
Yeah,
just
it's a big
in,
ocean
on,
out
or under
there.
the water. Yeah, yeah. I mean, oysters, right?
But yeah, so Claudia is super cool. She works in the seafood safety lab. So she is going to tell us a little bit about what she does there. Um, and then also, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what she does in her spare time as well, because she's a well-rounded oyster nerd. She's not siloed, so we're going to get some extras. And she is also we're going to talk a little about a bit about oysters in the wild too, and kind of how they're important not just as food but also as habitat. So it ties
Eh,
back into some of the things that I studied in my previous lab. So I'm excited to bring her on, and I can't wait to talk. If
let's
you
do
guys
it.
have any questions for her, please put them in the comments, and we will have her answer them for you.
Claudia, you ready? Yeah,
All right.
great. Let's do it. Wow, 62
All
people on the
right.
live.
Hey, Claudia.
Woo! Hello.
Holy cow. It's wonderful to meet you. It's
Oh,
this
it's so
is
nice to meet you too.
this is so dope. I'm just super excited. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit like,
Just forewarning, I'm wearing my earbuds, which don't fully fit, and so if you see me drop down, that's because one of them fell out of my ear.
oh no, oh no. Um,
So,
Claudia, it's certainly a privilege and an honor. Thank you so much for your time coming on our show. This is a relatively new show. We're building up our viewership, and also as a show, I've already said it, like we're building up while we fly. But you can see by the title and by whatever Jess filled you in on that we're just talking about anything in, on, and under the water. And this is a show by divers, really for divers. But tonight's topic is just super fascinating, and it's wonderful to have you here tonight to tell us all about pearls of the Gulf and your work with oysters, both on the science side and the art side. I did check out your Instagram page, and I'm like, okay, tonight's gonna be cool. I'm quickly becoming an oyster expert because I've got Wikipedia up and I'm just looking. I'm like, Animalia, Mollusca, class Bivalvia. That's what's up. No, this is all like Greek to me. But no, please, Claudia, introduce yourself to our audience, and let's get into it. I'm excited.
well, hi, my name is Claudia Schinnie. I am the lab manager of the Seafood Safety Lab at Texas A&M University at Galveston. Our lab works with oyster processors all along the Gulf of Mexico for their post-harvest product. And what that means is, so oyster harvesters will, companies along the Gulf Coast will go and they'll collect their oysters and then they will treat them to reduce bacteria counts. And then they'll send them to our lab and then we'll verify that the bacteria counts are actually pretty low. And so the reason that they do that with oysters is one, oysters are generally eaten raw. Two, they're filter feeders. So whatever is in the water is going to be concentrated in the oyster meat. So sometimes you'll go to the restaurants and you'll be eating them raw. They're like freshly shucked. Those haven't been processed, but the ones that have been post harvest processed are the ones that have come through our lab.
Wow, that is really cool. And the reason I pause is because, and I want to just extend this to my family here in Bermuda. Um, I eat oysters so rarely. It's a delicacy item for me. I don't know what the how people consume oysters, certainly in that area, but it's such an interesting thing, and I do recognize these animals that we do consume as filter feeders, and they will,
Mhm.
whatever is in the water will most likely be in the meat. How did you get started in all of this?
So I got my undergrad where Jess got her undergrad at A&M Galveston, and I was interested in coral reef conservation. And the more I took classes, the more I became more interested in fisheries. So I decided to double major marine biology and marine fisheries. One of the courses required was microbiology, and I took that class and I got a student worker position in the seafood safety lab. And it just, the rest is history. I ended up being a huge oyster nerd, and it's kind of, I've done some microbiology stuff, like strictly medical microbiology stuff on the side, but it's mostly been oysters. Just, I eat, breathe, live oysters.
Oh, I'm gonna do something real quick. I'm sure Jess has some questions for you that can certainly help benefit our viewership. But I'm gonna try to share my screen here quickly and bring up what I was talking about before. I don't know how our audience is gonna predict, but anyway. So yeah, I did have a Wikipedia up. Um, yeah, there's a lot to it. And I
So
gotta say
which
that
one? I can't, my screen is too small.
I understand.
So what is it, the Eastern oyster that you have
I don't
pulled
even
up?
know.
He has the Pacific
Okay.
oyster.
Was it
Yeah,
Gigas?
this is
Is that,
so interesting.
so there's, like everything in the ocean, there's multiple species. So the one that I specifically work with is Chrysostrea virginica. It's regionally specific to the Gulf of Mexico and the Northeast coast. You're on, Jess said, the Pacific coast.
And
And an
actually,
interesting thing, oh,
let's see. Oh, it looks like okay. It's showing us a little bit about some of the others. I think it was just that was what they were saying the picture was, but I think now
okay.
they're kind of talking about the different types of
Okay. Yeah,
which
this is
is
And
this is
cool.
pretty wild.
it's pretty neat because different species taste differently. And I mean, it also comes down to, again, they're filter feeders wherever they're from. It's the water is different. I mean, obviously, the Gulf of Mexico water is very different from the Pacific Northwest. And because, some people really like the taste of Pacific oysters. I personally prefer Gulf oysters. They're not as sweet and they're more salty, and I'm a salty kind of gal. So,
Okay.
but it's been really neat. The longer I work, the more I learn about not just the science of the oysters, but the farming and then the industry side of tasting and eating them. And so it's the longer I'm in it, the more I'm interested in it, just because there are so many aspects to working with oysters.
That is awesome. Yeah, so here in Texas, like oysters are pretty popular. They're a very popular food. You get them at a lot of
Mhm.
bars. They're served with like cocktails, with drinks. They're very like popular happy hour type food,
Oh yeah.
both raw and fried. And so it's important. So what your work does is make sure that the food that we're eating is safe. So you were talking about how
Well,
there can be bacteria.
with one caveat, so it's a common misconception that every single oyster that comes through our lab, or every time you go to a restaurant and you eat oysters, they've come through our lab and we've tested them. But that's not necessarily the truth, because it just depends on what type of oyster you're given, whether they have been processed to reduce bacteria counts or if they are just a freshly shucked oyster. And from the restaurant side, I don't know a whole lot, just because I don't work in a restaurant with oysters. And so I believe most of the Gulf Coast places right here on the water, they're all freshly shucked. So, I mean, they're harvested that day, shucked in front of you, and then you're served, like half shell. And then I think sometimes you can buy like tubs of just the oyster meat in the grocery store, and I believe those are post harvest processed.
Okay. Which do you recommend? Which are your favorite?
Definitely raw. I mean, raw, unprocessed, straight out of the water. They have the best taste.
Yeah, for sure. I've had fresh oysters, not in Bermuda when I was
Mhm.
living overseas, and it's definitely, at least for me, not having been raised eating raw food. When I was growing up, there was only like one sushi restaurant in Bermuda, so even eating raw fish was quite new growing up here in the 80s and through the 90s. But yeah, as you can probably guess, Bermuda being in the middle of the Atlantic over here, we would import any oysters that we consume, so they would probably be somewhat fresh based on how
Mhm.
quickly we were able to get them here. Um, but yeah, I just want to extend to our viewership. Like, if you have any questions about oysters, please post those in the comments, whichever platform you might be on. All 66 or so of you that are tuned into the live. I just want to talk about one thing that I think whenever I hear the word oyster, I don't immediately think about like eating them. I think about pearls. I think about like,
Right.
hey, we're gonna like go find some pearls, and even um like it's just what comes front of mind for me when I think about oysters. So tell us about the whole pearl thing, oyster
Yes.
and the pearl. That's the
And
title
do
of
you
our
have a
show, right?
hoard of pearls?
So
Because you're in your lab, it
I
looks like you got all kinds of stuff. Where's your?
this yeah, well, this isn't in my lab. This is actually in my house. But
Oh,
and I meant to bring. I have a test tube full of tiny little pearls that I
Oh,
found in an oyster one time, and I did the calculation one time. I think collectively I've been in this lab for about 15 years. And I guesstimated one time like how many oysters that meant that I had shucked, and I forget the number, but it's a lot. And only twice I ever found pearls in the oyster. So that these are just like wild harvested oysters.
okay.
So
wow.
and
Twice?
yes, twice. And the funny thing is one time it was full of like about 10 pearls, and they're teeny tiny and they're multicolored and misshapen. So the pretty pearls that you see for jewelry are all cultured, they're farmed. People place a little thing of sand in the oyster, and then so wild pearls that you find in wild oysters are very different from what you see jewelry wise.
Okay.
Interesting.
Are they more similar to freshwater pearls? The kind of like misshapen, or are those also purposely done?
I have no idea on that. I actually don't know,
Interesting.
Hmm.
because I think freshwater pearls are mussels, right? They're not
Yeah.
oysters.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I'm just taking this all in. Because what I'm thinking, if we go back to the consumption of oyster side of things, are all species of oysters fit for consumption? And one of the questions that I had is, you know, are there certain, like, what happens when you find, I guess, an aggregation or collection or a group of oysters that don't fit? They're not consumable. Like, how does that process work? If you've I'm sure if you've got bad water and you've got organisms growing in that water, you may not
Well,
want
it
it to.
it it
Yeah.
all boils down to the temperature. So bacteria
Oh,
love hot climates, which
okay.
we have in spades here in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
So we'll see in the wintertime now where it's cold, we're not going to see very high Vibrio. And one thing I forgot to talk about earlier is the bacteria. We're specifically looking at two species of Vibrio. It's Vibrio parahemolyticus and Vibrio vulnificus. They roll just right off the tongue there.
Super
And they're
easy.
the
Super.
ones I don't know if you've ever heard this in Bermuda, but a lot of people like to call it the flesh-eating bacteria here in the Gulf of Mexico, which it is not. But that's so specifically we're looking for the genus Vibrio in the bacteria, which love really warm climates. And then so we don't see the numbers very high in winter times when the water is cold, but they'll of course spike as the water gets warmer. And so I'm trying to think, it is very rare when it happens when the bacteria counts are too high, and it's all regulated by the FDA. So
Okay.
each state has different regulations, and then there's the ISSC and the NSSP. They're just larger federal organizations that monitor, just like the FDA with food and everything, that they have like different specific things that I'm trying to think. It's hard to I talk about it so long, and so it's hard to talk about it in a way that people would understand it and that haven't been doing it for as long as I have. But
So
it's just
maybe
basically
we shouldn't go
regulations that
out
the FDA. Yeah, the
and get
FDA
our
has
own. We should.
regulations that they have to stand by. So if that happens, so there's different types of processes that the oyster harvesters use to reduce the bacteria count. One of them is called individually quick frozen, and it's the same if you were to go to a grocery store and buy frozen chicken breasts. It's the same process. And so that's not an instant kill. It's for the bacteria counts. They have to stay in the freezer for a certain amount of time. And so we'll see that where an oyster sample is sent in and it's only been in the freezer for, let's say, 12 weeks, and it's summertime, the bacteria counts are really high, and
Hmm.
we'll process the sample and the numbers are too high. So we go back to the oyster processor and say, you can't sell this batch of oysters. The bacteria counts are too high. So they'll just stay in the freezer for a longer time. So that's generally the only time we see where bacteria counts are too high for that batch to be eaten.
So,
And if
in
it were the case where we
freshwater.
got some, say that again.
Oh, sorry. You can finish.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, if it was the case, let's say worst case scenario, they send us these oysters that have been treated to reduce bacteria counts, and we do our process and the bacteria counts are too high, then we would let the oyster processors know and they wouldn't be able to sell that batch.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Sort of batched, and you can kind of figure out what's what.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
think it's such an interesting industry. Here I'm a recreational fisher. I believe, and I stand to be corrected. Most 70% plus of the seafood we consume here is imported. So even though we are surrounded by the Atlantic and we have around 300 or so commercial fishermen, both full time and part time, we still import heck of a lot of things. We do have seasonality with our lobster season, which is September through March, and then there's all kind a raft of different policies, rules, and regulations around catching different things, different times of the year. I do have a question from my buddy, who I don't know why it's not on the chat, but he's asking, "What is your most popular seafood item to eat personally?" Like, are you there?
Oh, are you frozen?
We got you.
Oh, okay. Y'all froze too, so
Oh no.
I'm back.
Yay. All right. So I don't know if you heard that, Claudia, but he was asking, we had a question, what is your favorite type of seafood personally to consume?
Oh,
You don't have
ooh.
to say oyster.
Well, it'd probably be lobster. I mean, I do love oysters, but I would say lobster and crab are at the top of my list.
Okay. Okay, that's dope. I wish I knew, why. I think he was probably wondering if you were still consuming oysters based on the work that you do.
I
Um,
do actually.
that that's cool.
And so everyone else that I've ever worked with, oysters, what we do has completely turned them off of oysters. But
I can see that being
I
around
just
it all day.
And it's also the things that we do to it. So the first day we take the oyster meat and we shuck it and we blend it, and then we inoculate a test tube, which goes into an incubator of 35 degrees Celsius. And when you incubate bacteria at a warm temperature, it doesn't smell very nice. And so a lot of people associate that, but I guess I'm just used to stinky things because it doesn't bother me much.
No, that's I'm still thinking of the shocking and taking it out and then blending
Oyster
it.
Yeah,
smoothie.
Yeah, like
we joke and we're like oyster margaritas.
Just pour some champagne in there and
Yeah.
you're set.
I know. I kind of want to cue up the green phase emoji. That's not feeling very well.
That
But
sums it up. That sums
yeah,
it up.
it's cool. I mean, I have so many cousins, Claudia, that just refuse to eat anything raw. So
I mean,
oysters are
it's
definitely off
better
the
be
menu.
safe than sorry, but
I've
But
I've actually only ever had one raw oyster, and it was
oh.
force fed to me.
goodness, that's
Well,
that's a story.
I know a
Yeah,
lot of people
yeah.
are also weird with textures, and so they
Sure.
say that eating a oyster is like eating a big booger. Textures doesn't bother me, and so
Well, I mean, I just want to quickly touch on a little bit of our sort of theme, which is, of course, Valentine's Day and Love Month. And I know, and I'm not sure if this applies to, it does apply to oysters, right, ladies, in terms of the aphrodisiac vibes that you would get from it. I know in the Caribbean, I think around here too, but I think more of the Caribbean when I think about consuming conch. Certain parts of the conch is a bit of an aphrodisiac. Do oysters fall into that category as well? Have you heard about that?
I've heard about it. I don't, as far as I know, I don't think there's ever been any studies that had been done on it. Um, I eat oysters on the regular, and I feel like if anything, it's more the beer and wine that's consumed with the oysters that is
that
the
that
aphrodisiac.
does any gets things going.
Yeah.
All right,
All right.
that's
So you can
cool.
just
That's
have
cool.
champagne and skip the oysters, and you're still good. Okay. All right.
Oh, good.
Too funny.
I mean, I
So
don't even know where I'd go to get oysters. I wish if Magic, if you're on the live, any of my buddies on the live, just let me know what's going on. Where in Bermuda would I go to get some live oysters? We do have Eugenia Frenzel. Just taking a quick pause, Claudia. We have a comment from Eugenia. Hi, Eugenia. Eugenia says there is a billion oyster project in New York Harbor. Is there anything similar in the Gulf?
A
I'm gonna look that up.
billion oyster project.
So we have a lot of oyster conservation here. I'm not familiar with that particular project. I don't know if you want to pull that up,
I will.
Weldon. I'm not familiar with that, but we do have quite a
Yeah, I'm not
few
either.
organizations here. I myself have done some research into oyster. We have a lab. There's a lab at A&M Galveston that specifically studies oysters, so the live ones, not the seafood like Claudia. And then there's also the Galveston Bay Foundation. So they do a lot of really cool coastal work, not just with they do work on oysters, but they also on oyster reefs. And we can talk about that here in just a minute, how important oyster reefs are to habitat to lots of different species.
Yeah, let's
Um,
segue into that part
yeah.
of the discussion. Eugenia,
So
thank you for that little push.
yeah, thank you.
And I do have, for those of you like listening and not watching us live or on the replay, I did bring up the website of the billionoysterproject.org. Please check it out. We're just looking at this all live for the first time here. And again, thank you, Eugenia. 2014, this Billion Oyster Project, just skimming, reproduce that feeling for as many kids as possible. Wow. Okay.
So it looks like it's just an oyster reef restoration
Okay.
So
public initiative, which
do
Galveston Bay
have that,
absolutely
yes.
does. Yeah.
Yes. So
Okay, great.
yeah, that's a very important, and I'm sure in the other coastal states here in the Gulf of Mexico as well, because the Gulf of Mexico is surrounded by multiple states. But here on the Texas coast, yeah, Galveston Bay Foundation, they have a lot of really cool initiatives restoring salt marshes, and but we also have the oyster reef projects. Because the oyster reefs, both alive and dead, provide all sorts of habitat. They provide protection. They also protect our shorelines. So they are solid masses, right? And so whenever these waves come up, whether it's high tide or a storm, it actually helps protect the shoreline from erosion. So from losing that sediment or sand, depending on the area, from it getting pulled away. So there's
Okay.
actually some cool, actually, I might be able to queue up some cool videos for us to watch here in just a minute.
Okay.
But yeah, they're very important habitat, and lots of like juvenile fish will live in them because it provides protection from predators. A lot of cool invertebrates live there, so little small crabs and all sorts of neat critters will live in the oyster reef habitat. And what's neat is even whenever they are no longer alive, like those structures are still there, and
Okay.
like more oysters grow on top of it. So.
And you can also do cool artsy things with their shells
Yes.
as
Why don't you
well.
tell us about that?
So I collect the shells. So Jessica was talking about Galveston Bay Foundation, and they do a program to help with their oyster reef restoration where we recycle shells. So they'll get them from our lab, and then they get them from restaurants all over. And so sometimes if I see particularly pretty oyster shells, I'll put them aside, or if I find stuff on the beach, I've started making, because I started seeing that the decoupage oyster ring dish became really popular. And I had a lot of friends who were like, "Ooh, you should start making stuff like that." There's a cat's trying to make a cameo in the background.
No, the cat has definitely made a cameo. And in that same vein, Claudia, I just brought up your Instagram page. Guys,
Yeah,
please
so
find Pearl of the
this
Gulf
is some of the
on
stuff
Instagram.
that I've been making. And I mean, it's hard because the microbiology lab is full-time job, and this is kind of a side hustle. And
Sure.
I do have the dream of expanding it to the point where I can have a fair amount of proceeds go towards oyster reef restoration. But for now, it's just kind of like a little side hustle and just little things that I've been making.
Very, very
for
cool.
I don't
fellow
know if you
oyster
guys can
lovers.
see, but I'm wearing some of her
Oh, dear.
earrings that
Oh
she
my
made.
goodness, that is pretty dope.
And I have right here, I've got this really cute. It can be an ornament or a wine charm, wine bottle charm. But it's like it's beautiful. And it's got like the natural back on it.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I really love in terms of like using things like this for art. It does so many things in terms of course it looks cool, but raises awareness. It's a good conversation piece. In
Yeah.
fact, here in Bermuda, we had a wonderful young lady who was making jewelry out of lionfish, like fins and
Mhm.
parts and stuff, which was pretty cool too. And I know she stopped doing it, but there's another young lady that's doing some cool stuff too. So it's great, just for the movement, right? Taking the fish, we do eat them to beat them, cut the spines off, use them as toothpicks, consume the meat, and then with their fins and bits, you can make little odds and ends and pendants and stuff. It's really cool. With the oyster side of things, that is really, really cool. And then to
Yeah,
learn
it's
about the pearls too, I'm still stuck on the pearl vibe, just recognizing that you don't find pearls and wild oysters like that. Like they have to sort of be, I guess, in planted. The grain of sand is planted and it grows over time. I don't even know how that works. It's just like I learned, right, Jess, that you've got natural sea glass, but then when people want sea glass, they tend to just get regular broken glass and chuck it in a tumbler
like
and
tumble,
make. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I don't do that. Like, if I have some sea glass, I want it to be real deal, having
Right, like
been,
you found it.
yeah, like
Yeah.
authentic.
Yeah,
We
I
go with
have a couple
standard.
pieces I found I was excited about that they were like real. I never find like the beautiful color one. It's
Hmm.
always like the brown
Hmm.
beer bottle, but I'm like, well, at least it's real. But this right here is the Galveston Bay Foundation Instagram, and they have a lot of really cool information. You can see here, these are some of the restaurants that they get. So our restaurants here, they can sign up for a free program where they keep their oyster shells and they get picked up by Galveston Bay Foundation. They use these to create new habitat for oyster reef because the oyster spat, which is like the little baby oysters, they
Okay.
grow better on oyster shell than they do any other substrate. So they can't attach to like any hard substrates, but they do better. So they pick these up. So this is stuff that's been eaten, and shucked at a restaurant. And there's the shells, and then they get picked up by the foundation, and then they are processed so that way they don't have any like food or bacteria or anything gross
Sure.
on them because you don't want to do more harm than you do good.
And
So they wait.
those bleached oysters is what I use generally for my crafts. And when I find them, because what the Galveston Bay Foundation is, they cure them for, I think they said 6 months, and they just leave them in this
Mhm.
big pile.
Yeah,
And when
like
you have
lots of
oyster
sun.
shells that you expose to the sun, a lot of them have these like beautiful stripes and pinks and purple colors that come out that normally you wouldn't see.
Wow. This is wild for the scientist. I'm sure this is super, super exciting. For me, I'm just fascinated. Like I don't even know. So, Claudia, just to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. Let's say there's a young scientist out there that's keen to get into this um
No.
specific stuff. Um, what advice do you have for the budding young scientist that's keen on this line of science, really?
All right. Sorry, you said my name and then it
Oh,
cut out.
no problem. We're building it while we fly. We're working. We'll work with you. No, I was just interested that many of our viewership, quite a handful, are young scientists. They're not all in Bermuda, but certainly they may be young, in high school or older or younger. And so my advice for anyone in the Texas area, any young budding scientists that are keen to get into this line of science, what advice would you have for young people that want to get into this kind of thing, get into your line of work?
um, it first stay somewhere along a coast, whether it's Northeast, Pacific, or Gulf. And even if it's not specific to oysters, something that I wish someone had told me as a freshman is whatever university or school you end up going to, look at all the different professors that have ongoing research in labs
Mm.
and see if, even as a freshman, you can get your door in the lab. Even if it's washing dishes for a semester, it's getting your foot in. I mean, and I didn't find that out that you could work in labs until I was a senior. So that's 4 whole years of experience that I could have had just getting my hands on research. And even if, let's say, you work in an oyster lab for a semester, you think it's something you're interested in, you do work and you're like, you know what, I think I'd rather do fish. At least you've got that great experience. So that's one
Yeah.
thing, especially that I'll tell high school and freshmen is just knock on the door of every lab that has ongoing stuff and say, hey, can I volunteer to wash your dishes? And you show up and you do a good job. And generally, there'll be more hands on research that you can do down the line.
Okay. Um, and I'm sort of reflecting on the Billion Oyster Project because I also want to recognize that we've got a lot of citizens out here that are able to help and do different things. You've got people that consume oysters and people that don't. So how can the general public help with not just the is there any citizen science that can be done to help with your work, whether it's the sciencey side or the restoration side?
If you live close to the coast, one thing that Galveston Bay Foundation has done that I really like is an oyster gardening program. So it's gardening versus farming. Gardening, you're just growing the oysters not to sell to people. So Galveston Bay Foundation has tried to do or has successfully gotten anyone that is close or has access to the water, and they will put some sort of conglomerate of oysters, whether it's like oysters on a string or in a crab cage in the water for oysters, oyster spat to settle on. And then after a certain amount of time, then those juvenile oysters will go to Galveston Bay Foundation and they'll put them around different reefs in like preserves for. And so that's one thing that's a really great program. And even if it's not super convenient, if you've got a water place accessible where you think oysters would grow,
Yeah, I would guess that anyone with water access could be really helpful in that kind of situation. I know you probably got, I don't know how much coastline the Gulf has. I haven't quite looked it up,
A
but
a
lot.
lot.
A
it'll be a
lot.
lot. It'll be a lot. And I
And a
I
lot of
know,
people live on that coastline. So,
yeah,
Mhm.
we have so many, we have the entire Gulf, but we have so many bays and rivers and
sure.
tributaries. And so there's a lot of people whose like property will be backed up to it. So they'll have like their own private pier or something like that. So
Sure.
yeah, it makes it so people can be very connected to the water.
That's nice. We have a comment, Claudia, and viewership and listenership from Bobby. Nice to see you on
Oh,
the live again, Bobby Suarez. Bobby says lab managers can make all the difference for experiences.
that means a lot because I was his lab manager. So thank
That's
you,
pretty
Bobby.
dope.
Oh no, y'all cut out again.
Shout out. Yeah, we're working on some technical odds and ends, you guys, but bear with us. Um, I mean, when I think of citizen sciencey stuff, for our viewership that are kind of like, hey, I don't work in that
Yep.
space. I just want to do different things. Um, Certainly, I mean, I speak to the removal of plastic pollution from the ocean. I speak to culling invasive species, whether that's casuarina, or lionfish, or some other pesky bits. Um, but yeah, it's definitely like I look for opportunities for the wider community to engage. It's kind of what I love the most, because not that many people around here dive. There's a much larger population of people in Bermuda that do other stuff,
Yeah.
and getting in the water is kind of like, well, then, like, you and Jess can deal with that. But Claudia, does your research, or even your art, like, it gets you in the water? Are you diving much, or you, like, these are in these
Oh, y'all
cages, like, what?
froze again.
Oh,
Oh, good.
we'll wait for her to come back.
Are these
But
are
while
we
we do,
are they diving, Jess, for these things?
so I know they go out to the like wetlands.
Okay.
Oh, here she is,
Ah, I'm
Claudia.
back.
Hello. He was asking you about, do you dive to collect your oysters, or how are you collecting your oysters? Are you getting to get into the water sometimes?
No, I mean, they're pretty close to the water, so I haven't had to. I unfortunately haven't been able to dive in quite a long time. Normally, when we do it, it's just for recreation on trips and stuff. But
Sure.
um, how we collect our oysters is, when we did research on our oysters here in the Gulf, is we would wade out about 200 feet to an oyster reef that was protected by Texas Parks and Wildlife, that we had a permit to collect on. So we would just wade out in waist length water, give or take, with tide. So, but generally because they start out from the ground. The oyster reefs aren't too deep.
Yes, they live in pretty shallow water.
Hmm.
Um, they we have some pretty good oyster puns. We might have to put those in the comments. But yeah, so oysters can be shallow.
Yeah, I did see in one of your photographs, Claudia, you were like in very reasonably shallow water, like probably up to your knees, if that, in
Hmm.
boots. I was like, okay, I don't
Yep.
think we're diving for these things,
No.
because
No.
yeah, and I wish my buddy Brandon was on the live, because he's got insight into the local mussel. Because I'm trying to make this have some type of commonality with what's going on the island here. Because like I said, most of what we consume is imported, but I think mussels tend to be quite common, and these guys will free dive down with a chisel and a hammer and kind of chip away, and you do need a permit to do that. But
Hmm.
it's not like a lot. Like, there's not a lot of guys that do it. But it is great to consume local mussels, especially in mussel pies, but or in some other type of culinary creation. But there's not many out there. I need to do a deeper dive into the local mussel harvesting industry here. But this is all just so interesting. Anything else you'd love to share with our viewership tonight, Claudia?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I'm just just happy to be here and talk about oysters.
Well, we're so happy to have you. So if someone wanted to order some of your super cool jewelry or crafts or anything like that, do you ship or are you just local or how does that
No,
work?
I do ship. I think right now just to the US, but I mean, I'm willing to make special occasions just because I just opened an Etsy shop. So I'm learning the ropes. But I mean, they can either message me on Instagram or go to my Etsy shop, which is also Pearl of the Gulf.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm loving my jewelry. It's turned out really
Oh, I'm
well.
so
It's
happy. I'm wearing mine
yeah.
too.
Oh, look
I
at
saw
us. We're
that.
twins. We're twins.
You guys are
Um,
twinning. You got your oyster bits. That is so cool.
and
Um,
so thank you so much for coming on. We
Thank you
really
so much
appreciate
for
and
having
it's
me.
exciting hearing about all the cool research that you do and that's really exciting. We'll have to dive into more. It's fun. There's so much whenever it comes to oysters and a lot of things that I like that this topic, not only because it was kind of on theme with Valentine's Day, but it's something that isn't flashy per se. It's like bivalves that just kind of grow and you're like, oh man, don't step on the oysters, it'll cut up your feet. Like, but they're so important for the food industry, for habitat, for the coastline,
Oh, yeah.
and also like I mean we're connected to Bermuda, so like there are oysters all the way from Texas making it to Bermuda. So it's kind of one of those like neat. It's a overarching. There's something that's easy to overlook, and but I think it's kind of cool. And then they can also make beautiful jewelry and beautiful ornaments. So it's just all over fun.
Yeah.
Pretty nice. Claudia, thank you so much for jumping
Thank you so
on.
much for having me.
Wicked. Guys, I definitely. Well,
Oh, there you
sorry,
go.
my fault. I encourage you guys to follow Claudia. I'll put all of your social handles in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for taking time out to being on the show. And yeah, I hope to meet you when I come over to Texas
Yeah.
soon.
That would
I
be wonderful.
haven't told Jess about that. That's a surprise. That's in the works.
What?
Hey, Claudia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Bye. Have a
Thank you
wonderful
for having
evening.
me.
Boom. So food.
Yeah.
Food's a very very hot topic, and I really wish I would have done a little bit more research into certainly the local industry here, because even with all the work that I do with the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program and engaging all of the stakeholders here and getting a better handle and understanding of the local commercial fishing industry, it always tends to really revolve around the harvesting of fish. People tend to not think about other things like shrimp, crab, and I brought up scallops, clams, mussels.
Yeah.
I'm not
All
even
the
sure exactly,
invertebrates.
yeah, which species are that grow here and are harvested here, which are protected and which aren't protected, because we do have some strict protection rules. For example, the West Indian top shell is protected, conch are protected, turtle are protected, and shout out to the Bermuda Turtle Project. But I know there are some jurisdictions around the region that do consume turtle. They might not consume wild turtle, they may consume farm turtle, but around here we don't consume turtles. In fact, we've got the oldest legislation in the region with respect to protecting turtles. And
Oh,
now
wow.
we have a bit of an issue where we're cordoning off or caging off areas of seagrass because there's an abundance of turtles and a lack of predators. So the seagrass is kind of going away, and it's going away quite quickly. So everything's connected. And
Yes.
honestly, in having Claudia on the show and looking at this topic, I don't really think of oysters as being like, I don't know. I don't want to say I didn't think of oysters as being important, but I just never really had a great understanding of where they sat in the food web and
That's
ecologically.
yeah.
Like I do know, and I'm kind of excited about. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I did see something on YouTube or something recently where they took some muddy water, put in some oysters, and did a time lapse, and the water just cleared up.
Yeah. So
So they do
oysters,
some good stuff.
mussels.
Yeah,
Mhm.
educate us on some of these sciencey stuff. Like,
Yeah.
share what you know.
What and that I love what you said about, like, it's so easy to overlook them as, like I mean, whenever you just see them and they're all, like, bunched together, it's, like, not the most beautiful thing, until you realize, like, okay, this is food for us, it's food for the animals that eat them, but also, I mean, so it's like super important habitat. All of like the really cool fish that maybe you want to see whenever you're diving. A lot of those, when they're really small, when they're juveniles, they live near the coastline, and so that provides a really important habitat. It's kind of like seagrass beds. They might not be the most flashy thing. They might not be like the bright coral reefs, but you have to have those, and they're important for the shoreline. And so it's exciting understanding, like you're saying, once you kind of look at this big picture and how everything's all connected, that all of these pieces are important. And when you take away one, that's why we're doing restoration in this area.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so whenever you take away that area, it doesn't just affect the animals that live directly on the oyster reefs. It affects the salt marshes behind it. It affects the
Hmm.
adults, that if they don't survive when they're young, they don't become adults. So then that could affect the coral reefs because those fish aren't going out. So
Yeah.
so it's all part
Hmm.
of this like bigger
Hmm.
picture, and then just trying to really kind of realize that whenever we are interacting with different parts of the environment, that a lot of times one simple thing, it's not just like, oh, I'm just taking out this one tiny little piece, it doesn't even matter. It's kind of like Jenga. Ecosystems are like Jenga. So if you start taking out too many pieces, it can collapse.
Yeah, I can see that. And shout out to Steve and my cousin Vita and Montserrat. I got some thumbs up from those guys, which is great to see you. Thank you so much for jumping on. And Jess, I think for the first time since we've started the show, our sponsors and supporters were not acknowledged at the start.
Oh
I was
no.
so
We
keen
were
to
so
get
excited.
so excited, you guys. Certainly, without the support and sponsorship of Tele Bermuda International, Blue Wave, Current Vehicles, Ubervida, Atlantic Mooring Maintenance Limited, and Mammoth Lakes, Texas, we, I don't know what we'd be doing. What would we be
Yeah,
doing, Jess? I mean, right
I
now
don't
I'd
know.
be Netflix
Yeah,
watching.
Wednesdays would be a lot more boring if it weren't for them.
I
So
know, I
thank you
know.
guys so
So
much.
shout out to our sponsors and supporters, but especially shout out to you guys, our viewership, all 48 or so of you guys that are,
Yes.
you could be
Thank
anywhere
you.
in the world, but you decided to hang out tonight here with Jess and I and Claudia. And yeah, well, this
And
was, what episode is this, Jess? I keep,
think this is episode 6 of season
season 2,
2.
episode 6.
Please, please, this is Valentine's Day, so give us some hearts. Give
Some,
Claudia for coming on
yep,
our show some
for
hearts.
sure,
So
for
whether you
sure.
guys are watching it live or if you're watching the replay, please go in and give us some thumbs up and some hearts
Yep.
for this episode.
And for
Every
sure,
little bit helps.
I know all the engagement definitely helps, and for you guys that are really keeping an eye on Jess and I's work, I'm the guilty person. I'm the one that's taking ages to get all the audio extracted out of our shows and into podcast form. You know,
No, man, it's teamwork. You can't
hey,
take all the
it's
blame.
I
I won't
put
let you
it
do
on
that.
me. Put it on me. It's all a work in progress. We're just so excited to be able to share what we know, and in the case of like tonight and the last few episodes, bringing our friends on the show as well, to share what they know too. And it's just an exciting opportunity to be able to have this platform and grow this with you, and build it certainly while we fly. And I think every Wednesday morning I wake up and I'm like, did we get all the assets out? Did we promote it across social? Did I spell everything right? And I forgot a step this week, and then I forgot the sponsors. So it's wild. But it is certainly fun, and I do enjoy this and spending time certainly with you, Jess, and growing the show, growing the brand, growing our presence. And yeah, for those of you out there that want to support the show, it's easy. Engagement is easy. If you want to support, sponsor, slide into our DMs. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you love to hear more of, less of. If you just don't like the color of my walls, if you don't like if I,
No,
didn't
man, no
let me know.
haters.
Like, let me know. Like, bring it. But what we're gonna do, you guys, is I don't know, Jess. I'm ready to yeah, I'm ready to wrap up, man.
Yeah. I just wanted to build off of one thing that you said when you're talking about getting out there, even if you're not getting into the water, finding whether you're a student and you're looking at labs for opportunities or if you're a citizen. Um, just getting out there. There's so many really cool nonprofits, and they need people to help and volunteer and be part of it. So if there's anything that you ever hear us talking about and you're interested in it and you want to find somewhere in your area, you can either message us and be like, hey, I live in fill in the blank, you know, do you guys know of any cool organizations I can work with? Or just do your own searching, reach out to local nonprofits, and see a lot of them have really cool volunteer events. And so, you know, whether you are planting cordgrass in the marshes or you're
Hmm.
doing your, you know, collecting oyster shells, or you are hunting lionfish, or you're just doing a beach cleanup. Weldon does a whole bunch of really cool beach cleanups. We do beach cleanups here. And even if you don't live by the beach, you know, just making sure that you're getting connected to your environment. I think it helps you see all those little things a whole lot better. So
For real. I just had a beach
that's my
cleanup
end note.
actually. Yeah,
Yes,
I
I
mean,
saw last
and,
weekend.
and, and
That's
think yeah, think about some shout outs real quick. I just want to take a minute to shout out all the volunteers that came out to beach cleanup that I hosted. Yeah, Sunday afternoon at Daniel's Head. Collected a ton of debris. Most of it ended up in the skip for Atchison Waste Services to dispose of. The area, Jess, it's called Daniel's Head. It was home to a resort called Nine Beaches because there are, in fact, nine beaches on this particular property, and
cool.
quite a bit of debris was washed up, and we were able to tend to that. But yeah, whether it's with Guardians of the Reef or the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program or Keep Bermuda Beautiful, who are sort of at the head of all this effort, it's nice to go through KBB because then they can help coordinate. Shout out to Katie and Anne and the leadership at Keep Bermuda Beautiful. They do a lot of dope work. There's many entities here on the ground in Bermuda, and certainly I'd love to put more of a spotlight, Jess, on some of the Texas institutions and NGOs that do great work in the ocean space because it's nice to have that balance. Um, but yeah, it's a beautiful ocean. I encourage all of you to. I mean, if you're tuned into the show, you've got an interest in the ocean. I think we can safely assume that, or you're just here to see Jess. I don't know. I don't know, but certainly um I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning more and more about all this stuff, and I it's just amazing how much knowledge is out there, and but how much there that we still need to learn. um I'm just excited, you guys. That's just, I'm sorry.
And I think this weekend is Galveston Bay Foundation is having their annual crab trap removal. So we have a season here where you're legally allowed to put out crab traps. But then when that season is closed, they have there's a whole bunch of bycatch, and some of them just get lost or misplaced. And so they have a volunteer event. I believe it's this weekend, that is for the crab trap removal. And there's a bunch of other cool events that they have throughout the year. So if you guys are local in the Houston, Galveston area, check that out. And if you want to go get some extra cardio in, you're set.
Yeah, that's really it. I think one of the things that I'm still working to craft. I've had it on again, off again, because I bump into people all the time that are like, "Bro, like, how can we help volunteer? How can we sign up? How can we get involved?" And I started a mailing list that I'm with Mailchimp that I'm trying to rebuild to get the word out to people that are keen to do stuff. So that's a work in progress, but certainly Magic and all of you guys that are on the live, just thank you so much again for hanging out with us. Magic, I still have your gift bag from winning. It was what, the first episode of the season or whatever. But the good news is, the longer that Magic's goodie bag stays in my house, the more stuff gets added to it. Like last
It's
week,
a
we
magic
added.
bag.
I know it's just it's a magic bag.
It's a magic bag from Magic, guys.
There's a copy of Dr. Jeanette's book in there now. There's extra goodies in there now. So I mean, I'm gonna have to upgrade the bag the longer it stays here. So that's pretty exciting. But hey, you guys, it's
It's
another
time.
episode of the Wade in the Water live show. My name is Weldon. It's wonderful to have you here, and whether you're watching us live on the replay or listening to us on the podcast, thank you, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you guys next week, Wednesday, same time, same place.
And I'll be a year older, and my birthday's Friday. Oh
Yes.
man, I'm getting old out here, but it's wonderful to see another
Older and
year.
wiser.
What they say, like another trip around the sun. Wow. And I hope the weather's gonna be good. I think it is. We've got we got our comment from magic comments real quick. In that case, we'll talk about pickup sometime this summer. You might
Smart
find like
man.
some new dive
Smart
gear in
man.
there,
Yeah.
Holy cow, just like
So the
magic. Take it
brand new
all. Take it
True
all.
Dive
I
wetsuit, like
shout out to True Dive. Yeah, just need your measurements and boom, we see what happens. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna queue up our intro outro, and we will see you on the other side.
all right, bye y'all.
We are gone.